Hi everyone, I'm Miranda and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I'm excited to share a suggested reading list for November. I've been really enjoying sharing these seasonal reading lists over the past few months and I hope you've been enjoying them too. I've got a big stack of books to share for November, from cookbooks to a poetry anthology to non-fiction reads and plenty of fiction as well. So I do hope you enjoy my suggestions, but let's get on with it because I've got quite a lot to share today. So of course tonight is Guy Fawkes Night or Bonfire Night in the UK. And I have to admit I'll probably only be watching the fireworks from my garden, and I'm planning a nice cozy evening having some hot apple cider maybe and curling up with this mystery, which is The Progress of a Crime by Julian Simmons. It's one of the British Library crime classics and it was first published in 1960. But I have a feeling that it has quite a few of those golden age mystery vibes to it, and it sounds the perfect read for Bonfire Night because the murder actually happens on Guy Fawkes Night and a man is stabbed by the bonfire on the village green. So it just sounds like it will be a fun read to curl up with this evening. So I'm looking forward to this. And then of course I have to mention the comfort book club pick for November, which is The Diary of a Provincial Lady by E.M. Delafield. I run the comfort book club with my mum, Donna, and this is a favourite of both of ours. We both really adore this book. It's so funny and light-hearted, and it's written in diary form, and the diary entries start on the 7th of November. So I think this is a really great comfort read for this month. I find that November can often get a bit damp and dreary and the evenings are long, and this is just the sort of book that I want to curl up with. I know it will make me laugh and it really is one of my favourite comfort reads. So I'm really looking forward to reading this one this month, rereading it because I've read it many times before, but I always enjoy it. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to this. And then I think this will be my 5th year of reading the Christmas Chronicles by Nigel Slater. I know lots of people now have the tradition of settling down with this book. It starts on the 1st of November with a toast to winter solstice, and there are some great recipes by Nigel for some warming drinks, including I think some hot apple cider. So I'm going to have to take a look at that. And there's so many wonderful essays just celebrating winter, the start of winter, all of the festivities. There's one I love called The Scent of Winter. I think Nigel Slater's writing just really awakens all of your senses. He's such an amazing writer and I love his descriptions of food, but he also writes about the season of winter really beautifully. It's his favourite season. He loves the cold and the snow, and it's not my favourite season, but actually since reading this book so many winters in a row, I think I've actually come to appreciate it myself so much more and to really look for the joyful and the lovely things in winter. And I'm very grateful to Nigel Slater for helping me to enjoy this season more and really appreciate all of the changes that you can see in nature, but also all of the cozy things you can enjoy at home, like having hot warming drinks, like lighting a candle. And although those things I know sound a bit cliched, he writes them in a really fresh, invigorating and interesting way. So yeah, this is a book that I love to return to, and I always start picking it up in November. And then of course later on in November is the start of Advent, and I was so excited to get this new cookbook by the German and Welsh author Anya Dunk. It's called Advent, Festive German Bakes to Celebrate the Coming of Christmas, and I'm so excited to bake a few things from this. Everything looks absolutely wonderful. There are so many festive recipes in here, and it's also illustrated by Anya Dunk's artwork, which I think is really special. It adds such a nice dimension to her cookbook, and I love German goodies at Christmas time. I mean, who doesn't, I think? And all of the sort of classic German biscuits and things like Stollen and all sorts of treats that I absolutely adore at Christmas time are all in here. So I can't wait to get a little bit adventurous in the kitchen and hopefully make a few of these. So this one I'll really be turning to on Advent, and I'm sure it will inspire me in the real run up to Christmas that starts. So yes, one I'll be enjoying more at the end of November. And then to me, November is quite a reflective month, but it's also a month that's full of different emotions in some ways. I grew up partly in the United States, so I always remember celebrating Thanksgiving in November and that being a very joyful time. But of course, at the start of November, there is Armistice Day and there's Remembrance Sunday as well, a bit earlier in the month. And so that to me means that November is also a time of remembrance. It's also a time of grief and loss sometimes too. And there are many different types of loss. And one of the most interesting books that I've read about loss is actually this memoir called Gone by Min Kim. It's called Gone, a Girl, a Violin, a Life Unstrung. This got a bit damaged in our move to Yorkshire, which is annoying because I absolutely love this cover. I think it's really gorgeous. And I was lucky enough to hear Min Kim play her violin at a sort of book signing event that she did in London. This is one of my favourite memoirs, and I really recommend it if you want to read a bit more non-fiction for non-fiction November. I highly recommend picking this one up. Min Kim was a real child prodigy. She was an exceptional violinist, so talented. And this is a story in a way about different types of loss. She shows how in many ways she lost her childhood through being such a genius at music and going for so many competitions, having to do so much practice. Violin took over her life, music took over her life, but of course she really loved it as well. And then as a young woman, I think in her early 20s, she found the most amazing Stradivarius violin, and this really helped her career take off as well. But then one day when she was at a train station in London, this violin was stolen. And a lot of the memoir is about this. It reads almost like a sort of mystery or thriller, because part of it follows the investigation of the police in trying to track down this violin. It's also about how Min Kim felt this huge loss. She said that it felt like having one of her limbs cut off, to be deprived of this instrument that was so much a part of how she could make music, how she could express herself. And she had to somehow find herself again and find an identity outside of just being a violinist. And I found it a really moving memoir. I read it quite a few years ago, but it's really stayed with me. And although she never got that violin back, it really does end on a hopeful note too. And it's about how she came to get back into music, even with such a great loss to her career. So I really recommend it. You don't have to be a musician. I'm not, to enjoy this. It still is a fascinating read. And then I was recently sent this book by the publisher, Malcolm Gaskell, The Ruin of All Witches, Life and Death in the New World. And this sounds like a great non-fiction choice for November to me. It says, "The Ruin of All Witches tells the dark, real-life folktale of witch hunting in a remote Massachusetts plantation. These were the turbulent beginnings of colonial America, when English settlers' dreams of love and liberty, of founding a city on a hill, gave way to paranoia and terror, enmity and rage. Drawing on uniquely rich, previously neglected source material, Malcolm Gaskill brings to life a new world existence steeped in the divine and the diabolic, in curses and enchantments, and precariously balanced between life and death." And he looks at the sort of micro history of one family in particular and how their story told a much bigger story of what was happening at this time and also what was to follow, with so many more witch hunts happening all over the world. I just think this sounds really fascinating and will be a good non-fiction pick for me for the month ahead, so I'm hoping to get to this. And then, speaking of Armistice Day, I have a few suggested reads for that. So first up is this Persephone biography. It's a biography of Julian Grenfell by Nicholas Mosley. I first read this Persephone book years and years ago, and I thought it was incredible. And I think it's one of the most underrated of the books that they publish. I rarely hear of anyone reading or reviewing this, and I think it deserves so much more recognition. It really is an incredible biography. It's about Julian Grenfell, of course, the young poet who was killed during World War I. And Nicholas Mosley really examines the relationship between Julian and his mother in this book. It's a really fascinating study of a mother-son relationship. He also writes about Edwardian society and what drove so many men, especially of Julian Grenfell's class and sort of position in society, what drove all of these young men to want to go off to fight. Many of them, in fact, seem to want to die in war. And he explores why that was. Why did these men have that feeling? What was really going on? And why did society make them feel that that was an option that they really wanted? So it explores so much, and it's a very rich biography, and I really recommend it. It's a great read and would be a really good pick for Armistice Day or Remembrance Sunday. Then this book, The Return of the Soldier by Rebecca West, was a book club choice, not the Comfort Book Club, but a regular book club choice last November that I read, and it's a very slim novella, but a very powerful story about a man who's been wounded during the First World War, and he returns home to the three women that love him, his wife, his cousin, but the only one that he actually remembers having feelings for is another young, well, more middle-aged woman actually by this point. He remembers her though as a young girl and his first real love. And he's suffering a very strange kind of memory loss in that he really doesn't remember his wife at all. And he just remembers his love for this other woman. So the three women in this story are drawn together under these very uncomfortable circumstances. And it's just a very powerful book. I really recommend it, and it's very slight, so worth reading this month. And then something a little bit more light-hearted, but that starts off on Armistice Day, is The Unpleasantness at the Bologna Club by Dorothy L. Sayers. This is a Lord Peter Wimsey mystery, and Lord Peter is visiting a friend at his club when a body is discovered on Armistice Day. And I just always enjoy picking up a Lord Peter Wimsey mystery. I love Golden Age crime, so I do enjoy this series, and it's one that I might not always read, but I might listen to. I like the BBC dramatisations of the Lord Peter Wimsey series that star Ian Carmichael, so I'll probably listen to their version of The Unpleasantness at the Bologna Club this month. Then I always like to read a bit of poetry, and I think this anthology is particularly fitting for November. It's called The Magic Hour by Charlotte Moore. It says 100 poems from the Tuesday afternoon poetry club. And I love the story behind this. Charlotte Moore is, of course, a huge fan of poetry, and she founded a Tuesday afternoon poetry club where every Tuesday she and her friends would gather around the fireplace and share and discuss a poem. And this anthology has collected 100 of their favourite poems and also comments by the different members on the poems, and it's just a really fun read. And the poems are sort of categorised under different headings, and I think a lot of these headings are appropriate for November. There's earth, air, fire and water. There's mystery and enchantment. There's joy and sorrow and war, and hearth and home, and loss, age and death. So I think that this is a really lovely anthology to, if you have a fireplace, curl up with by the fire. If not, just snuggle under a blanket and get cozy and enjoy some of these beautiful poems. Now, I've already mentioned celebrating Thanksgiving a lot in my childhood, and I still like to bake a pumpkin pie at the end of the month. And a book that has one of the most memorable Thanksgiving scenes in it, to my mind, is from Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reid. This book is, well, it tells the story of a young black woman who works as a nanny for a white middle-class family. And one day when she has taken out their young child to the grocery store, she is accused of having actually kidnapped the child. And this event sets off a whole train of circumstances. But the Thanksgiving scene in this is just incredibly memorable because it's the most awkward Thanksgivings you could possibly imagine. So the heroine of the book, Amira, has just started dating a white man, and she turns up with him at her employer's house because they have invited her for Thanksgiving. As soon as she arrives, she realizes that her boyfriend actually knows her hostess, and it's clear that they have a very awkward history, and it turns out that she in fact dated Amira's boyfriend a long time ago, and they broke up in high school in very embarrassing sort of situation. So they have to sit through this horrendous Thanksgiving together, and it really is one of the most memorable scenes from the book, and it also marks a turning point in the book. And it's just, yeah, it's so worth reading and a great one to pick up this month, and you'll see what I mean by the Thanksgiving passage in here. It's certainly very memorable, but I hope if you're celebrating Thanksgiving, you don't have such an awkward one ahead of you. Then some more fiction choices. There's A Fugue in Time by Rumer Godden. This starts out in November and it goes on through to December. It's quite an atmospheric read. It's set in London during World War II, and it's about a young woman called Grizel Dane who has been born and brought up in the United States, but she volunteered to work in London during the war, and she decides to reconnect with the British side of her family. And she turns up, I think it's at her great uncle's house in London, just in time to discover that he's being asked to quit this house. He doesn't want to because he has so many memories of the past that are really wrapped up in this house. And she hopes to try to help him to save the house, but in the meantime, she starts to ask a bit about her own family history and which people lived in the house. This is very similar to Rumer Godden's book China Court, which was a Comfort Book Club choice in August. It follows very similar themes and a similar structure in that the past is very much intermingled with the present. She uses the same trick of tenses in that events from the past are always written in the present tense and events occurring in the present are always written in the past tense. And there's that real intermingling of the past with the present. And Grizel learns more about not actually a relation, but a young woman who was adopted by her family in the sort of late Victorian time. This young woman was called Lark. And she had a very, very important presence within the house. And you gradually, through the story, learn what happened to Lark. There's also a bit of a present day romance that occurs as well. And of course, all of this is played out against the backdrop of war. It's really very memorable and definitely one I recommend picking up in November. Then also towards the end of the month is Hanukkah, and I wanted to highlight this book, which is a children's book, More All of a Kind Family by Sydney Taylor. I actually recommended one of these books in my September suggested reading list too, but I wanted to highlight this because in this book there's a whole chapter about Hanukkah. It's called Festival of Lights, and I remember reading this chapter as a child. My mum used it to really help to teach me about Hanukkah as part of learning about all sorts of festivals of lights. And it really sort of stayed in my mind, this chapter. And this is just a really lovely series called the All of a Kind series, and they follow a young family, lots of sisters, at the sort of turn of the 20th century, and they're quite a poor Jewish family who are growing up in New York City, but they find so many ways to have fun and also to celebrate family and togetherness. And it's just a really charming series and one I really recommend if you have young children or are a teacher or something like that. I would recommend having a read of the Festival of Lights chapter in here. And it really is just a lovely one to share with young children as well. Then, coming up on Netflix this month, I think it's actually being released on the 10th of November, is the film of Passing, which is the classic novel by Nella Larsen. I'm really looking forward to watching the Netflix film. It sounds really interesting. It's all been filmed in black and white, which I think is very fitting because this is a novel from the 1920s. And it's about two women who knew each other as children, and then they happen to bump into each other as adults, having not been in touch for many years. But coincidentally, they both meet in a situation where, though they are both black women, they are at that moment in time both choosing to pass as white women. And this is just an incredible book. It's very haunting and harrowing. The twist at the end is astounding, and I think it will translate so well to the screen. I can't wait to watch this. Although I often recommend this as actually a really good summer read and heatwave read, because the tensions reach sort of boiling point between the characters and it also starts out in a heatwave. The book moves forward through to winter, and so it is actually quite a good cold weather read too. But also, if you haven't read it yet, this is just the really great month to pick it up because of the film coming out, and it definitely, I think, will probably be worth reading the book before seeing the Netflix film. It's very slight, so again, it's one that you can read very quickly. And then my final recommendation is another novel, The 13th Tale by Diane Setterfield. This is such a classic Gothic story, and it's one that I often like to return to because this time of year, because it starts in November, and it has all of those elements of just a great, slightly creepy Gothic story. There's a crumbling old house. There are strange family relationships going on in this. The story starts with a young girl who works in her father's bookshop. She's contacted by a very famous author who has finally decided to write her biography, and she decides to tell her life history to this girl, and they both end up through this learning so much more about themselves and about what haunts them as she unfolds her story. There's a real twist in this one too, and lots to keep the reader guessing. It's just a real page turner as well, so if you want a book that is a great page turner and gives those very spooky vibes this month, then I would recommend this one if you've never read it yet. But anyway, those are all of the books that I think would make great reads. Some of them I'm hoping to read myself this month, so I'm looking forward to picking them up. But let me know what you'll be reading in November, if you're tempted by any of these books. I'd love to hear. But thanks so much for watching, and do give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. You can also subscribe to my channel by clicking on my face that pops up over here on the screen. But I hope you all have a fantastic November ahead, full of lots of good reading. Thanks so much for watching. Goodbye.